Hi and welcome to the EdTech District. In this video, I want to show you how you and your students can use Google Forms to create a hypertext or an interactive narrative, which will enhance the learning process because your students will use a range of higher order thinking skills and make the final product similar to an online role-playing game. What makes a nonlinear hypertext or interactive narrative different from traditional or linear narratives is that the reader is given options on how to proceed after reading a section of the text. This means that the path through the story and its outcome will be different for different readers. By using Google Forms, I can give my reader options how to proceed after finishing a section of my form. Here's an example. In our unit, we covered a range of myths and legends. And at the end of the unit, my students had to rewrite a myth or legend with Odysseus as one of the main characters. Therefore, they had to analyze Odysseus' strengths and weaknesses. They also had to know one myth or legend very well so they could synthesize elements from the original myth and the character of Odysseus. If you're interested, I gave them the book called Myths and Legends Explained, which they could freely explore, so they also had to evaluate which of the myths and legends would be most suitable for the task. Eventually, they created this hypertext that you see right here on the screen, and you can see by looking at the verbs that I've just used, this task ticks all the boxes related to higher order thinking skills according to Bloom's taxonomy. Now here's what the finished product looks like. You have the introduction about Odysseus, and then the last sentence is like, he was shocked by a loud bam when he touched the, and now it's up to the reader how to continue the story. Does Odysseus touch the yellow stone or does he touch the blue stone? Let's say he touches the blue stone. Okay, we click on next, and we're going to the Greek gods. Okay, Odysseus and the Greek gods. Then you would rate the story, and at the end of this passage, again, also there were two means of transportation, a camel and a horse. Odysseus decided to ride a camel or ride a horse. Maybe in this case, I choose a camel and go next. Oh, it looks like now he's going to Egypt. Okay. Just to show you what else is there, if I go back to my introduction, if I click on Yellowstone, then suddenly Odysseus is entangled in the world tree. What's happening here? After that, let's see, back in Greece, he was visiting the port. He found two modes of transport, a carriage and a ship. He decided to go on a voyage on a ship or go on a voyage on a carriage. I'm going to go for ship. And next, Odysseus and the lone man. Okay. So you can see that it's up to the reader how to continue and how to navigate through the story. Your class is preparing the entire set of stories or story components, and then the reader will navigate according to the choices. It may sound a little complicated, but the key to successfully doing this task is just setting things up very clearly and logically. Now, to organize your hypertext, your students and you will need to set up a schematic like this. So you can see that we have 11 sections, and you could have one student in charge of each section, which means this one would be enough for 11 students. And the way this works is you start off with section number 1, which is the introduction. And you can see that at the end of section 1, you have to give your reader two options. So option number 1 would bring your reader to section 2. Option number 2 would bring your reader to section number 3. When the reader is at section 2, at the end of it, the reader would be given, again, two options, which will bring them either to section 4 or section 5. Now, by looking at this schematic, you can see that you can make it as simple or as complicated as you like. For example, when you look at section 4, there's only one option given, so not much of a choice here. Whereas for section number 7, there are 3 options given at the end of it. So you have option 1, 2, and 3. Option 1 would bring the reader to section 9. Option 2 would end the story at section 11. And the third option would bring the reader to section 8, which is also an end. And when you look at section 9, that's the other way around. So here we had 3 options at the end, but here we have 3 incoming connections, which means when you look at it, all these lines, all these connections, they stand for one conversation between your students. For example, if you look at section 9, whoever's in charge of this section, they would have to talk to the student who's in charge of section 5, section 6, and section 7, so that the transition is smooth. So if we talk about Odysseus, for example, and section 9 starts with Odysseus arriving at a port on a ship, then this student has to communicate that with this, and this student to make sure that they all include in their option that Odysseus is actually going on a ship. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense logically. Once the schematic is set up and all the labels are clear and everybody knows what they are in charge of, then the creation of the form is actually not that difficult. You can choose, depending on your students, if you want them to give total control over the form and over their sections, or if maybe they submit their parts as a Google Doc and you are the one copying and pasting those things in and setting up the Google form. That's really up to you. So the way we do this is we go to Google Forms and we create a blank form. That's the first step. Then, as you can see, we have 11 sections, which means we have to create 11 sections. So we click on the Add Section button. That's section 2, section 1, we add one more, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So let's scroll down. 5, 8, didn't get everything, 9, 10, 11. Okay, sections 10, 11 out of 11. The next thing I will do is I will set up the options and the links between the different sections based on the options. So what we do is we already have an untitled question here by default. So option number 1 is here. We add another one. Option 2, just by clicking on it, Google will add option number 2. Now, when we go back to our schematic, we see that for section number 1, option 1 will go to section 2. Option 2 will go to section 3. So we go back to our Google form. We click on the 3 dots under the question. And then we select go to section based on answer. So if somebody chooses option number 1, they will go to section 2. And if somebody chooses option 2, they will go to section 3. Then that would be required, because otherwise they would just be able to continue without choosing anything. So make sure that this one is required and you have the section set up correctly based on your schematic. I'll show you one more, and I think then you understand how this works. So let's go to section 2. We need 2 options. Section number 2. That would be this one here, section 2. We add a question, because that's what is going to contain our options. So option 1, option 2, again, it's required. Option 1, let's go back to our schematic, that will bring us to section 4. Option 2 brings us to section 5. Okay, so 3 dots, go to section based on answer, section 4, and option 2 will bring us to section 5. And then you continue doing the same thing for all the other sections. You don't have to worry about after section 2 what's going to happen, because we made this a required choice, which means the path over here will override whatever is written over here, so we don't need this. However, you do have to tell Google Forms when the story is over. So for example, in here, sections 10, 11, and 8 are endpoints. They're the endings of our stories, or possible endings of our story. And we go back to our form, go to section 8. The student would write the title of that section, then the story part, and then where it says after section 8, we click on that small arrow, we click on submit form, because that means the story is over. Same with sections 11 and 10. So section 10, the student would write the title of the section, and then the story part after section 10, submit the form. Same with section 11, which is already the end of our form. So by default, once the student is finished with section 11, then the form would be submitted anyway. So what I've shown you is the simplest way of doing it, where the title is the section title and the text would be the section description. Now it might be that your students want to add a picture or even a video. And if you do that, let's add a picture over here. I will use Google image search to find one. Let's just take this one for now, just for the sake of showing you guys. Insert. Now this picture will be added after the section description. If your students want to have the picture at the beginning of the section or before the text, which means above the text, then they would have to also add a title and description separately. And this one now goes below the picture. And then they would have to, instead of using the section title and section description as the places where to put the text, they would have to put their text in here. They would have to put it in this separate title and text section. And then the image is on top, the title and the text is below, and then the options for this section. Finally, I wanted to make it clear that hypertexts or interactive narratives are not limited to the language classrooms. For example, in history, students could create alternative timelines of historic events. In business studies, students could create a role-playing game where the main character, which would probably be the CEO, has to make a range of business decisions that will determine the rise or fall of the company. And in arts or ICT, students could create interactive stop-motion or animation films. So you see that the possibilities are truly endless, and I hope I could inspire you. Thank you for watching.